Welcome back to the D&D Basics series. If you haven't watched part 1, you can see that here. In this video, we will be carrying on from that video and going over combat, which is, without a doubt, the most complicated part of playing D&D, which is why it had to be its own video. There are lots of ways to run combat. You could use a battle map, like I will be using to show examples, or you could just run the combat in your mind's eye, also known as theatre of the mind combat. Combat is effectively run in two phases, the turn of the players and the turn of the enemies who are controlled by the DM. To determine who goes first in combat, roll a d20, for each player and enemy, add the dexterity modifier, and in descending order, the person or enemy who rolled highest goes first. This is called an initiative roll, and is often accompanied by the phrase, "I'd like you to roll for initiative." On the turn of the players, they get 3 things that they can do in any order they like. One of these things is to move. Most races in D&D can move 30 feet in a turn. If you're using Theatre of the Mind combat, this doesn't matter as much, but if you're going to use a combat grid or combat map, then one of these little squares is 5 feet, so you can move 6 squares in your movement. The next thing a player can do on their turn is take some form of action. This could be a number of things, including using their weapon to try to attack an enemy, cast a spell, drink a potion, interact with an item, dash, or dodge. To make a weapon attack, roll a d20, add either your strength or dexterity modifier, depending on if it's a melee or ranged weapon. These are generalizations to keep it short, but there are exceptions to this. And then add that character's proficiency bonus. Again, I'll be going over character creation things in a separate video, but for all level 1 characters, their proficiency bonus is +2. So if a character's strength modifier is +2, they get to add 4 to their attack roll. So they roll their d20 to attack, they get 12 on the dice and then add 4, so they get a total of 16. But what does this mean? How do you know if that roll means that they hit? Well, each enemy will have an armor class value, shown as AC on the monster's stat block. If that 16 is equal to or greater than the AC value, then the attack hits and they get to deal some damage. Now, you roll the dice associated with the weapon that you used to attack. You can find which weapon does what on page 149 of the player's handbook. But let's say that you have a longsword. You can roll 1d8, add your strength modifier, and then take that result away from the enemy's hit points. Or HP, which can, again, be found on the monster's stat block. Once that number reaches 0, that enemy is defeated, knocked out, killed, or however your players decide to deal with it. Casting a spell can be a lot more complicated. So, for now, I will say that if you get a bit confused, read the spell and then work as both player and DM to agree on how it works for now. And if it's something like Firebolt, where it calls for a spell attack roll, that's very similar to making a weapon attack roll, but instead of adding your strength when you roll to hit, you can add whatever your class uses to cast spells. For a wizard, this would be your intelligence modifier. For a sorcerer, your charisma modifier, or a druid, your wisdom modifier. If the spell calls for a something saving throw, then that player doesn't roll to attack. Instead, the enemy has to roll to see if they can resist the spell's effect. So for instance, the spell Burning Hands unleashes a torrent of flame in a wide arc. So accuracy isn't really important. However, it's then up to the enemy to try to dodge out of the way. So, to determine if the enemy can dodge in time, the Dungeon Master will need to roll a dexterity saving throw. Check the monster's stat block and under saving throws. If there isn't anything there, that if it doesn't say saving throws, dexterity +5, just add that monster's dexterity modifier to the d20 result. But this time, you're not comparing it against an armor class of the monster. The enemy is instead trying to get equal to or over the spell save difficulty check of the person casting the spell, which at level 1 is 10 plus whatever modifier that they use to cast the spell. So, for the wizard, who has an intelligence modifier of +3, that spell save DC that the enemy is trying to beat is 13. If they don't manage to get equal to or greater than that number, the spell does its thing. Again, read the spell to figure out what each spell does. There's a whole lot more that could be said on spells, but that may take a very long time. So this is where I'm going to leave it for now. If you want to know something more specific in another video, just tell me in the comments below and I will do my best to cover it as best as I can. On to some of the other things that you can do as an action on your turn. Drinking a potion or something like that is pretty self-explanatory. Read what the potion does and then enact the effect of the potion. The most common one you'll be using is a healing potion. It heals your character's hit points. And to figure out how many hit points you regain, you roll 2d4 and add the result to figure out how many hit points are restored. Another use of an action is to interact with an object. Say one of your players are in a bar fight and want to flip over the table onto its side to try and get some cover. That's absolutely something that they can do. The Dungeon Master, however, can ask you to roll for a skill check if they think it's appropriate. Dashing is something that you can also do as an action on your turn. It's really simple, you just get to move your movement speed again as an action. So for instance, if you have a 30-foot movement speed, you can move and then use your action to dash, allowing you to effectively move again, so moving 60 feet in total. And the last thing I'm going to talk about for now is dodging. Sometimes you can't quite get in range to do an attack and there's nothing around for you to interact with. So what do? You can get ready for someone trying to attack you and dodge and move out of the way in a way that makes it harder for someone to try and hit you. While you're dodging, an enemy has disadvantage on attack rolls made against you. Disadvantage? What does that mean? It simply means that you roll 2 d20 dice and choose the lower of the two to use for the check. Advantage is the opposite of that. You roll 2d20 and pick the higher of the two to use for the result. You can have advantage on attacks by being hidden away from the enemy, flanking, or if your DM deems that something you have done puts you in an advantageous position, you may get advantage then. The last thing a player can do on their turn is something called a bonus action. Not all classes get something that they can do with a bonus action right away, but a bonus action can be used for certain classes to do certain abilities. Some spells can be cast using a bonus action instead of a main action, such as the spell Healing Word. And it's something that's, in game terms, very fast and requires very little thought. Some dungeon masters rule that speaking aloud in the midst of combat is a bonus action. Others rule that a healing potion can be drunk as a bonus action. But in general, as you're getting started in your D&D adventures, an ability will say if it uses a bonus action or an action, and not everyone has something to do as a bonus action. That's fine, it's a bonus, or a benefit that you get for choosing that class or that race. So that's everything that a player can do. Now what about you dungeon masters? You are in control of the enemy, or enemies, and in general, because you have a lot to keep track of, the things that the enemy can do are listed helpfully on the enemy stat block. Alongside this is what you need to add to the roll and what to roll for damage, and any abilities they have are also listed on the stat block. The attack rolls and saving throw abilities that your creatures will have are treated the same way as a player's would be, only if the monster targets a player from a saving throw ability, that player will be making the saving throw, and not you, the dungeon master. And the last thing that you need to understand for creating combats as a dungeon master is something called CR, or challenge rating. It's relatively simple at its core. The challenge rating of a monster should be equal to the level of a party, assuming there are 4 players in the party, as D&D is designed for a party of 4. So if you have 4 players, at level 1, the CR of your monster should add up to 1. And if you have 2 players in your party at level 1, the CR of your enemies should add up to half. A party of 2 at level 4, the enemies should add up to a challenge rating of 2. Once you really dive deep into the system, there's a few flaws and things that don't quite make sense, but in general, it's a really good rule of thumb and a great way to tell, in a roundabout way, what your players should be going up against. So, we have covered the main rules you're going to need to know for combat, and gone over the 3 main pillars of gameplay. And in the next part, we will go over some story ideas for a group of first level players to partake in. But if you don't want to wait until then, well, I recommend the D&D starter set. It comes with everything you need to get started, including some already made characters, so you don't have to wait for my video on then. It's all in there for you. It also comes with a starting adventure, The Mines of Phandelver, which is great fun. Oh, and let's not forget the dice. There are dice in the box as well. Like I said, there is literally everything you need in there ready to go. So thank you guys for watching. Subscribe if you want to see those next parts. And until next time, did you know I'm English? Cheerio.